Welcome to the Power Panel podcast, a show where we follow the leadership journeys of exceptional African women at the helm of public service and civil society. Our question is, how do African women lead and deploy power? I am your host, Ambassador Rachel Omamo, a senior counsel, diplomat and former cabinet minister in Kenya.
She is the former special advisor and first African director at the United Nations Climate Change High-Level Champion.
Youngest female member of parliament in the history of her country.
Served as Botswana's trade minister, Bogolo Kenewendo.
Leadership is nurtured, passion is nurtured, the drive is nurtured.
It is April 2018. Bogolo Kenewendo has just made history by becoming the youngest female minister in her country. The 30-year-old walks into her new office to face her first day as Minister of Investment, Trade and Industry in Botswana. It's a powerful position in one of Africa's leading star nations. Botswana is an upper-middle-income country with a stable democracy. This is an exciting moment for a young, ambitious woman. Surely many thoughts must be running through her mind. How does she feel at this moment?
It was a very interesting day. I was very upbeat. I had a very good conversation with the president about expectations. And I walked into the ministry. My office wasn't ready. So technically, I couldn't be ready. So that sort of set me back for a little bit. So I had one more day to get ready. But the truth is, I had a moment of reckoning. I had a moment of reflection of, now that we're here, what are we going to do with this moment? I was not afraid, but I was very well aware of the responsibility that I had. And not just the responsibility I had from the president who had appointed me, but the responsibility that I had of the many Botswana that were now looking at me, but most importantly, the many young people that I knew were really looking at me with hope.
Bogolo is a very special breed of African woman leader. She was a member of parliament at 29 before becoming a cabinet minister. She is the outgoing special advisor and Africa director to the UN Climate Change High-Level Champions. Bogolo seems to possess an internal buoyancy, a perennial radiance that has enabled her to maintain momentum and to keep her career on an upward trajectory.
I would hope so. I would hope that when one looks at my career, they see consistency, they see an upward trajectory in that consistency of continuous reinvention. And that's something that I have been quite deliberate about, of making sure that I keep what, in my opinion, is a sustainable cadence of growth, but sometimes it appears outside like a growth spurt. But for me, it's like a sustainable cadence, something that I am able to maintain, I'm able to control. I always have a handle, to an extent, not always, of the growth and the trajectory that I am in.
How did this young woman rise so swiftly to the helm of public service? To find out, let's go back to her childhood, to when she was a 12-year-old.
At 12, I was a scrawny primary school child trying to figure out if I could fit in a dense traditional troupe. And I think at the time I didn't even make it because I wasn't confident enough. I was transitioning between primary school and junior secondary school. And by 13, it's really when I got pushed into a space of finding myself. Really, my confidence, I was pushed into a space of confidence by my teachers, and I really have to give them credit because my English teacher, my agriculture teacher, and my moral and music teachers decided that they wanted me to do a little bit more public speaking. They would push me to speak in front of the class. And then one school assembly, the agriculture teacher asked me to make a presentation on current affairs. And I believe that is the day that my life completely changed. Because from that moment on, I was expected to consistently challenge myself, consistently make updates on current affairs. And that is the day I started learning to stand up for myself and to develop a voice.
This prompts the question, is leadership nurtured?
Certainly, leadership is nurtured, passion is nurtured, the drive is nurtured. You know, you could be book smart, which I was, but not necessarily having a direction of what do you do with being naturally book smart. But having those teachers that guided me allowed me to really see the potentials, the opportunities that were there. By the time I reached 16, I was very determined. I looked at the opportunities. I knew I wanted to be an economist. I started researching the different fields. I set myself a 5-10-year goals. You know, I started really being very ambitious. But between 12 and 16, that period was a very delicate, nurtured space that I owe quite largely to my teachers and my parents. I have historically taken chances and done things that scared me a lot. From writing essays that I really didn't want to, joining competitions that I really didn't want to, but I was challenged to do so. What I see as another really pivotal moment in my teenagehood was a written essay competition for accounting. I think it was a Bankers Association essay. And I really did not want to write this essay, but my commerce teacher said, no, you must write this. So eventually I did. And I won the overall best essay in the country. Now, the prize for winning this was a dinner and a reception with the central bank governor, with the Minister of Finance, and with the president, amongst other dignitaries. Now, when I was sitting at this table during this reception, I kept asking everybody at this desk, at this table, so what did you study? What did you do? What was your career path? And everybody at this table had studied economics. And I must tell you, that's how I chose to study economics. So it's been those kind of small little, what many would see as small little happenings, challenges, volunteering, competitions that positioned me in different spaces and have put a little bit of a spotlight on me across the many years, that when I look back, you know, and I think Steve Jobs has said this quite well, that there are all these little dots that when you look back, they really paint a beautiful canvas of your life and things that to make sense. So when I look back at all these competitions, most of them, they put me in a space of me winning or being awarded this achievement Achieving Scholarship, which the majority of the Botswana members of parliament, including then the vice president of Botswana, the president of Botswana, former president of Botswana, many of them, I ended up in that network. And by the time I became Botswana's youth delegate to the UN, I was already in that network, having been awarded the scholarship of achieving. So there are all these little dots, being challenged, challenging myself, doing things that scare me. All these dots, they connect.
It is extraordinary to me that Bogolo was able to engage in such high and powerful circles at such a young age.
I think this is very important for a child that says, oh, yeah, certainly she was coming from a private school, from an affluent circle. So, of course, she had access to the president. It's to the contrary. I was coming from the complete opposite. I went to a government school. I shouldn't have had access to the president if I hadn't written that essay and joined that competition. I became a youth delegate by completely pestering the youth office. The youth director at the time would tell you that I lived at her office, and she got completely annoyed with me and the other youth delegate. She just said, you know what? Okay, let's hear you out. What is this proposal about having a UN youth delegate and the representation at the third committee during the UN General Assembly all about? You know, it was about persistence, about understanding what we could offer and what other young people were already doing around the world, and not entirely about the privilege that we had because we didn't have any.
It is clear that Bogolo doesn't just wait for things to happen. She makes them happen. An example of this is what comes next. Bogolo receives an offer to join parliament. How did she attract this role? Did she lobby? What did she do?
In part, I may have inadvertently lobbied for it. I had a radio show.
A radio show in your 20s?
Yes, I had a radio show on one of the leading radio stations. I was giving economic overview and commentary on policies and how different current affairs internationally were affecting everyday Botswana. Then I had also a column in a weekend newspaper where, again, I did political economy commentary. And, really no one was spared from my commentary. Sometimes I would get called to the Economic Council of Cabinet to come and elaborate on what it is that I wrote on my column. Sometimes, some spokesperson of the government would call into my show quite upset. So I think both those pieces put me in the spotlight or in the eyesight of government, that when they were thinking about who they wanted, who had an economics background, who also checked a box for young person, woman, who was technically sound, because they were looking for trade, economics, and a couple of other technical expertise, that my profile made sense. Quite honestly, I cannot speak to how it ended up being me. I just remember receiving several phone calls, having several conversations over a couple of months.
We arrive at the first signpost on Bogolo's journey. We note that Bogolo positioned herself into the light astonishingly, so that she could not be ignored even at a young age. The lesson we draw from this is to create your own radiance by tapping into your strengths and placing yourself in spaces where your value can be seen by others. The percentage of women's representation in Botswana's parliament is, according to Inter-Parliamentary Union data of 2024, around 11%, well below the international gender equality aspiration. It is no wonder that at this juncture, Bogolo carefully considers the pros and cons of plunging into the world of politics.
We have specially elected seats. Ordinarily, at the time, there were 4 that the president can use and parliament can elect for special reasons, it be to fill a technical purpose or, given whatever they think is missing in parliament. And I had been a youth advocate for a while, since I was 16. I had participated in the youth council for activities for a while. And, I thought if I had been so strongly advocating for youth participation in decision-making and leadership, and I'm being asked to be at the table, at the highest leadership table, highest decision-making fora, why would I say no? It wasn't the easiest of decisions. Of course, some of my mentors were concerned about, being thrust into such a high-level decision-making space at such a young age. Politics is such a dirty game. Politics is so difficult. How would I handle it? But fortunately, one of my mentors, who was one of the first women members of parliament and first women ministers, she recalled and replayed her first conversation of going into parliament. She had said no when she was first approached to run for parliament. She had said, "Oh, but politics is such a dirty game. Why would I go into politics?" And the first president had said to her, "But if politics is such a dirty game and people that go into politics are all malicious, as you say, and, they're all into some sort of nastiness or another, then indeed you're handing over your government and your nation into a dirty game altogether. So if anything goes wrong, then you truly do deserve the government that you get, So at the time, she thought twice about it and eventually got into government. So as I was contemplating, and I told her about this offer had been made and how everybody else was saying, I must think really hard about this decision because politics is a dirty game. She replayed this conversation back to me about us getting the government that we deserve, because if we do not think that we are worthy or our nation is worthy of our skills, then who is it worthy of? So that's how I ended up making my decision.
As a young female parliamentarian, how did Bogolo use her power? How did she make a difference?
The first things I put in the order paper were all related to changing the penal code in relation to abuses of women and children. One was sexual conduct and abuses of children. So sexual offenses to children, having a sex offenders registry, what age was deemed as a child, what was deemed as statutory rape, what penalties were deemed as sufficient, what amendments needed to be made to the Children's Act in order to be at par with the penal code. I really wanted to make sure that with my voice in Parliament, I really elevate the voices of the many, many organizations and women that had been working tirelessly on the empowerment and protection of women and children in Botswana. And I really prioritized that. And in the end, some of these things were reflected even in how some of the ministries were allocating budget. So I was quite happy with that. That as something that I'm personally very passionate about. And then from a more professional point of view, I'm also very passionate about economic development, about poverty, about access to economic equity, to having economic equity and the structures providing that economic equity. Funny, because right before I was appointed minister, I was in the Public Accounts Committee, and I was asking the various ministry to be really accountable to the Tevin. So we don't have pennies, it's the Tevin.
As we take this short power break, we ask that you subscribe to the Power Panel podcast. Let's work together to expand the Power Panel community. Visit our website, birdsongafrica.com, and follow us on social media to plug into the Power Panel network. Email your thoughts to hello@birdsongafrica.com. When we return, we unveil the next stage of this journey. This is the Power Panel podcast. As a young minister, Bogolo perhaps had to manage two important things. One, her fame, and second, how to use her agency to transform the ministry, to get people to follow her vision in order to serve the public.
The second part was the most important part, in my opinion, really leading the ministry strategically and getting buy-in of the team in the ministry, and then getting buy-in of the broader government, especially because issues of the Ministry of Investment, Trade and Industry are so cross-cutting. And, you're young, everybody's wondering, what are you going to try to do? We've been here 30 years. Some ministers come in and they don't try to change anything. Why would you try to change something? So what I wanted to do in getting this buy-in, and I really took my time with it, was sit in it, learn, listen, absorb from the history of the ministry. I spoke to several past ministers and past directors of the ministry, and then about 2 months later, set the new strategy of the ministry. And I really thought that this would be the most crucial part to ensure continuity of my thought process of the strategy and the direction that I thought was important for the country, even past my being there.
I wondered about the decision-making style that Bogolo adopted.
Very consultative and very much part of the team. Sit with the team, get the ideas from the team, and then put them in a structure. Before I go and say, this is what I want from the team, I give an opportunity to hear how they are hearing it from each other as we are bouncing ideas off of each other. It is always clear that the last word is going to come from me, but it doesn't necessarily always have to come from me. We're moving together. At some point, I used to call it servant leadership. Like, we're part and parcel of a team. I'm not leading from the front. I'm there in the middle with the team. We're consulting, but not so much that we're losing productivity and efficiency, in a much more nimble manner. And we make decisions as timely as needed. So that was important because, you don't want it that people say this is Bogolo's strategy, so they don't want to make decisions once you're gone or if you're not around. You want people to be able to make a decision fast enough because they align and they own a process, and they align and they own a strategy. I wanted people to fully buy into why are we coming up with an investment portfolio incentive?
As we arrive at our second signpost on Bogolo's journey, we learn that decision-making and managing people is the essence of leadership and power. If you cannot make firm decisions and define the direction of travel, no one will follow you. Leadership is often felt at a visceral level, at the level of the soul. Through this experience, what frustrated Bogolo? What broke her heart?
Oh, things are so slow. Government is it's like a rat king. Sometimes you lift a tail and you think you're making progress and you find another tail. And you lift the other tail and you find another. And that can be frustrating. Sometimes our processes can be really, really sluggish. And it can take quite a lot to maintain the momentum that you need, even for the team, because sometimes you've gotten the team excited, they have bought in and they want to see a little bit of result to maintain the momentum. And when the result doesn't come, some people lose morale. And so that sluggishness, especially when it comes from external factors, can really just feel like soul draining. And sometimes, even in your team that says yes to your faith and then doesn't actually comply, two-faced people, navigating politics now, office politics is actually part of the biggest challenges that a leader must learn to face, to deal with. At what point do you start to really assert your authority versus do you just play things off and just hope that people know who is in charge here? There's a point where you must put your foot down and say, no, I am in charge here, and you must fall in line. And then there are times where that hard-handedness actually serves more destruction than order. So it's important to learn that balance. And unfortunately, you can't be taught that balance. You learn it on the job. You learn it on the job. One day you put your iron fist down and it turns out actually that table is a glass and it cracks. And it cracks and you learn that, oh man, okay, that was a little too hard. Maybe I should have brushed the table. I should have brushed the table and said, actually, can you figure this out? Can you go and talk this out without necessarily really asserting your authority? And then there are times where you have to put your boot on and then, pull your rifle and actually say, you know what, I am the boss here and my word is final. So learning that is crucial, but it comes with experience.
In the converse, what made her want to dance on the ceiling in jubilation?
Progress. Let me tell you, I loved being out in the public. I loved it. I loved being out in rural areas. It was the small wins. We introduced something. It was a road show. And we would meet micro businesses and we would give very small loans. And when we started doing this, there were skeptics, especially in the cities. Sometimes when you introduce something for rural areas, those in the cities do not relate. And we just remained steadfast and did this. And I remember we went back to this village and there was a lady, she was so excited to go show me her house. She was really, really proud that she now had a brick and mortar house and that she could break her finger on this brick and mortar. And, it just made me so happy because she had moved from a mud hut to a brick and mortar and with electricity. It is incremental progress, but it had made such a big difference to her family. It made it so worthwhile to me. I loved those stories. We know we've changed the way that you do business. We know we've saved you time. We know we've saved you money that's associated with doing business. We know we have substantially changed the way that people see doing business in Botswana. We introduced the online business registration system. We moved business registration from it being 71 days to 4 days. Okay, I can say that. You now can go online and you can register a business, and in 4 days you're complete with the process. It's a big accomplishment that I'm very proud of. And we are very also proud of the record time that we made these reforms. We are very proud of it. But nothing, absolutely nothing like seeing the look on that lady's face and her children.
At this point, having taken stock of her time as minister, Bogolo reflects on the question of letting go, moving her leadership in a new direction. Is knowing when to let go a leadership skill?
I have had some of the best mentors in the world, and one of them happens to be the sitting president. And one of his favorite things to say is, you must understand timing. Everything hinges on timing. Know when to stay, know when to leave. Most importantly, know when to listen, know when to speak.
Bogolo reinvents herself. She transitions in her leadership from the national space to the global space.
I took a Pan-African to the world. There is enough space in the world for African voices, and you're needed there. I had actually took some time. I thought that I was going to go on sabbatical because I was really, really exhausted. Campaigning for elections it took everything out of me because I campaigned for the current president and the current government. And I thought I was going to take sabbatical, but COVID happened. And right when COVID happened, I have experience in doing economic crisis recovery policies. So I got roped into a lot of economic recovery policy work by the G7, by the G20, and then by the UNSG's office and the DSG's office. So I found myself coming back to work a lot faster than I had anticipated.
Global boardrooms often present unusual dynamics for African women leaders. Bogolo comments on them.
If you had asked me before I was minister, I would have said to you that it felt very much like I must fight for my space. It feels very tokenistic. And then when I was minister, I had to fight because I chaired a lot of trade negotiations. I had to fight to prove myself for the first 3 or so months. And then, I built my credibility. And then after, now I have this backing of that. I've been in government, and that background has really served me well to an extent. So I understand that my experience would not be the same as many others because I have a lot of friends in similar positions. So our experience is quite different. But there are still pockets where, I must check people, remind people of my experience. Like, are you serious right now? Do you know my background? Because there's still spaces where, and I'll give you an example. I think this is best given in an example. There's still spaces where I think they are ran on almost neo-colonial mentality. Their thinking is on old aid mentality. So it is, okay, we will have an African in this space, but she must adapt to our thinking. And I am nowhere close to adapting to that thinking. So quite often I point out that people must learn to yield to the humility that they don't know everything, but especially when they're trying to solve for problems in a region that they've never lived in. Because you can't just go in and assume that they do not know how to solve for the problems that they are facing. The only way you can be a good development partner is to understand historically where their challenges are coming from, how they may have ordinarily dealt with them, and what they may also think those challenges could be dealt with. And you could come in with an outside or an eagle eye perspective, and together that hybrid solution could work. But just thinking that your eagle eye solution is the best really is what ordinarily is the solution for destruction. There's a lot of biases that we're facing. It's racism, it's misogyny, it's ageism. We're consistently having to fight the battle that we're African. And not just that we're African, but that I am Black African. And as a friend of mine recently said, but you must be reminded that I understand my African culture, African geopolitics quite well, but I also understand yours because I'm also British taught. I'm also American taught.
Yes.
You know?
Bogolo makes an intriguing point here. We often forget how international we are as Africans, and how global and broad-minded we are.
It's so important that we stand in that truth in whatever rooms and leadership we find ourselves in. We stand in that truth. We don't minimize ourselves by thinking that, you know, there's an African expert that's going to come from elsewhere, but really do recognize that we are multifaceted, we are multi-taught. You know, we understand different geopolitics by sheer benefit of colonization. I have said this before. This is the downside and upside of colonization. I understand your background as much as I understand mine. You know, the legal background in Botswana is British. I've had to learn it. And I say to a lot of young African women that I mentor that they really should not shy away from this. It is part of what makes them them and what gives them that added advantage of understanding the world better.
Bogolo is invested in raising up young women leaders. She has established a mentorship program with Pan-African reach and explains to me why this is a priority for her.
I really wanted to create a safe space and a reliable space for young people. And we just hope that one day we look back, we find these forests that we have created of formidable African leaders, formidable African young women leaders that we have just connected, that we have inspired, that we have motivated. And not only in Botswana, but, you know, we're connected through Nala all over Africa. I am hoping that we become the generation that leads the economic revolution, like the next phase of a revolution. We've seen the political revolution in the 50s, the 60s. We've had now, you know, the long push to really stabilize this political independence. and we are slowly really trying to get to this economic revolution. So I'm hoping that we really start to get roots and solidify good leaders for an economic revolution, those that can truly lead economic independence for the continent.
This strong leadership vision for Africa's transformation through the efforts of young women leads us to inquire about Bogolo's leadership philosophy. What is her power mantra?
You have no idea what you're capable of. I would say, well, that is my mantra to get me off my feet. But the leadership one is, if at the end of the day you have done something that makes life a little bit easier for the person that comes after you, then life is worth living tomorrow. One more day.
Bogolo's journey and her rise demonstrates her courage to strive, her self-confidence, and her willingness to embrace change. She is unapologetically talented and proudly African. Through her experiences, we see that leadership in the public sector requires a skillful balancing of power and politics, not only to manage people intelligently so as to achieve goals, but to also uplift the lives of ordinary people. I am grateful that Bogolo has shared her story with us, and we wish her good fortune as her journey continues. We thank you most sincerely for listening and look forward to your company on our next episode. This is the Power Panel Podcast.